On the 27th of March, the Coffee House Shots team will be joined by special guests to give you their take on the spring statement. We will be live on stage at London's Cadogan Hall. To get your tickets today, visit spectator.co.uk/Coffee House Live. We'll see you there.
Also, a party referring an MP to the police.
That baffles me. It baffles me. We are a party. It does baffle me. I don't understand. The hurty words must have been very, very hurty indeed.
Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots. I'm James Heale and I'm joined today by the Spectator's political editor, Katy and former Director Head of Communications, Gawain Towler. Now, Katy, it's been a big 72 hours in the world of reform. Talk us through what's been happening.
So we've heard a lot about the professionalisation of the Reform Party, and I think actually it was the same trio as currently assembled. Just before Christmas, we're talking about whether 2025 would be the year of Farage, and we did mention that infighting could be a problem, and it turns out that infighting is a problem. You had on Friday the news that through a statement from the Reform Party, that Rupert Lowe, one of the party's 5 MPs, the MP for Great Yarmouth, had been referred to the police by the Reform Party, was facing 2 complaints allegedly involving staff members, and was also accused of threatening behaviour towards the party chairman, Zia Yusuf. It's worth pointing out that Rupert Lowe denies all these charges, has suggested this could be an elaborate witch hunt, and links it to bad blood between himself and Nigel Farage and others in the Reform Party. And of course, just a few days before this happened on Friday, there was an interview in the Daily Mail with Rupert Lowe, in which he suggested that Nigel Farage was not the Messiah and therefore should stop acting like he was. Now, if we're joining all these dots, and let's throw in again a few more denials from all sides that anyone has done anything wrong, this then rolled into the weekend. And you had both Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe coming out saying infighting is bad for the party, but doing so separately. And there's not really a clear sense of how they're going to stop the infighting yet. But as we both wrote, James, in a cover piece for The Spectator a few weeks ago, tension between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe and the wider party is nothing new. It's been quite evident for some time. There's been, I think, a few clashes between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. You think back to when Elon Musk took to social media, his platform X, to say that Nigel Farage did not have what it takes to effectively lead the Reform Party. Nearly all, reform figures came up being very effusive in praise for Nigel Farage. And while Rupert Lowe did tweet, it was not seen as suitably loyal compared to the other messages by some involved. And then I think you add to that differences on policy. Rupert Lowe, I think, a few times has spoken a bit out of step, whether it's on devolution or other matters. But also now, one of the things he said is he believes he's the target of this witch hunt because one of the reasons he says is because he was very saying we need more deportations, pushing for an even harder line on immigration, and that was not welcomed by Nigel Farage, and that's potentially opening a front that could cause problems later down the line if you can successfully paint Nigel Farage as being too mainstream, selling out in order to get to power. And I think for now you just have quite a messy situation where Katy, looking into this inquiry, seems to have distanced themselves from some of what Rupert Lowe has said. However, you now have a former Tory MP coming out saying that they've spoken to one of the staffers who allegedly put the complaint in against Rupert Lowe, suggesting it's not about Rupert Lowe, and therefore the whole situation is very murky. And I think, given both are saying that the only way forward is one of unity, is that one where the two come back together, or is that one, which is perhaps more to the liking of many in the Reform Party, close to Farage, one where reform continues, but Rupert Lowe is not to do with reform?
I mean, Gawain, the timing of this is quite coincidental, isn't it? Is a witch hunt gone on here?
I'd like to pick up something. In the original statement that was put out by the party, it said in Mr. Lowe's office. It did not say Mr. Lowe. They never claimed it was Rupert who was involved in the bullying allegations. That just wasn't true. And people seem to have read the statement very fast and responded very quickly without actually reading the statement, I would point out. So that was never the case. It's unedifying. It's no fun. It is significantly unideal or suboptimal. A whole range of words suggesting I wish they were bloody well wouldn't. As I see it, the party has grown largely on the back of Farage's ability to cut through and speak to the general public. It was getting somewhere before. Tyson did an excellent job before the election, building it, keeping it alive, growing it, and all the rest of it. He'd done an excellent job. But there's no doubt that Farage is mercurial and quicksilver when it comes to these things. And that change since July to now, with the 400 new branches, the 219,000 members, the 27% of the polls, at times leading the polls, this is largely down to Farage's leadership. Now, Rupert is a very able man. He has been a very successful businessman. And his business career, he's wound people up on numerous occasions, as we all know. But business and politics are bedfellows, but they're not always the most comfortable of bedfellows. And if you have been in charge of a multi-million operation, you've employed a lot of people, and you are the boss, it can be frustrating if, when you click your fingers, everybody doesn't jump to your tune. And so Rupert has been getting increasingly frustrated. Now, the fact is, we are developing policy. That's in hand. The complaints in the Mail piece were on issues such as this. Yes, of course we are, but there's a limited amount of resources and limited amount of brains sitting in their office. I remember in September, before I was fired, somebody coming to Nigel with some policy proposals and suggestions. He said, crack on. Go away, work on it, don't talk to me about it until March, because I've got so many other things on my plate. Rupert wants there to be policy now, and he's putting out a whole series of suggestions. And you mentioned the migration thing. Nigel, one thing I think everybody in politics agrees is Nigel is brilliant at timing. Rupert is more of a populist, Nigel is an unpopulist. He takes unpopular ideas and popularises them, whereas Rupert is taking what looks like a populist idea, the remigration, or the deportations. We've made it very clear that anybody who's broken the law and is a migrant, particularly illegal migrants, gone. But if you cannot move 1 million people instantly, it's just not possible. It's not practical.
But what Rupert Lowe would say would be that that's all about policy. This is in terms of the laws and what's actually gone on here and the legal right and wrongs. This is a bit of a political witch hunt. Do you disagree?
I don't think so. The timeline will out. I mean, you mentioned the KC. The KC has questioned some of the thing that Rupert has said, but it hasn't exonerated the original allegations. Now, I understand, and I may be wrong here, I understand that the 2 members of staff, one of whom used to work for Bridgen, and I mean, this sort of clarification, we all knew that from the start, which is why I find it's odd that we've had a clarification on something we knew. But the allegations, they were employed in Parliament. They are parliamentary employees. The HR processes being conducted are ipso parliamentary things. That's the responsibility. The party is desperate not to be accused of brushing things under the carpet and things of this sort, because we've seen that in other parties, have we not? They delay, and it's the cover-up rather than the fact that's often the worst thing. So the party comes in and says, these allegations have come to our notice, we must handle them. But actually they're being handled anyhow. So Rupert, you can imagine, being the sort of chap he is, would have received something from the party, and he'd say, well, it's in hand. You don't need to be involved because it's being dealt with. And the party was saying, no, we've got to do it. And so therefore there's these crossed wires, cross purposes. And I can understand why Rupert kicked back. But it's not that he hasn't, the claims, I think, that he hasn't cooperated. He has cooperated with the parliamentary HR thing.
Yeah, but the police thing, I mean, also a party referring an MP to the police.
That baffles me. It baffles me. We are a party. It does baffle me. I don't understand. The hurty words must have been very, very hurty indeed, if it is a verbal threat. Personally, I think that in politics one has to grow a thicker skin. But that doesn't mean one encourages bad behaviour or things of this sort, and it is unedifying, deeply unedifying, and one wishes it didn't happen. But I wasn't a witness. I haven't been there. I don't know what was said. I don't know how bad it was. I understand yesterday there was a claim that it was 83 days or something, that one event took place in December.
Yeah.
But the other event and they did ignore that. The other event took place much more recently, and that's why they reported it. It was the second, not the first. So that's what I understand to be the case.
And Katy, I mean, assuming that we don't see an immediate rapprochement between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage, how much of a thorn would Rupert Lowe be in the side of Farage?
So he's lost the whip. So now we have 4 Reform MPs. So I think, you could say a reduction of 20% in terms of party size. That can create some issues. But I mean, it was really the case they're a very small flank in Parliament and not at the number whereby it helps you particularly get questions and so forth. I think the question is, does Rupert Lowe have enough of a following and enough focus to be a thorn in Nigel Farage's side if things stay as they are? And you look at the history of Nigel Farage, and Gawain will know more than me, but there's always been a sense that he has been able to quite quickly get rid of potential threats and opponents, and they haven't really caused him too much bother. On Rupert Lowe, I think it has been quite clear he has been building a following. Mm-hmm. I remember going to the Reform annual conference in the autumn and sat there. I think I was pushed to the very back of a room because it was so full. I having some, I don't know, like an inflatable wall pressing on my head. It was that busy. It's one of my memories up on the balcony. But watching the speech after speech, Rupert Lowe had various standing ovations. He was a real hit with the crowd. I think he quoted Socrates at one point. It landed pretty well in the industrial estate of Birmingham by the international airport. So the crowd was, very enthusiastic for him. And I think also his online presence, particularly some call it Elon fishing when you try and get retweeted by Elon. It could be that Elon Musk just particularly does see his tweets, but either way, he is regularly retweeted by Elon Musk. He has a very large following online. And I think his style of just putting out, kind of monologue type statements on immigration and others means that, within the Reform base, there is a base which is Rupert Lowe specific. Is it bigger than the support from Nigel Farage? I would say no. And I don't think it's quite at that point yet. But of course, if you have Rupert Lowe hanging around the House of Commons, still with that Twitter and social media presence, who now feels... I don't think he felt inhibited to say things anyway, to be fair. But even more, just doesn't even now get an Aggie message from a Reform staffer saying, please, can you not go off message? None of that now. You have him saying that as Reform try and do, Gawain was talking about, which is a more carefully charted path of the timings of election cycles, when to get your message out there. But Rupert Lowe gets lots of attention for the things he is saying. Then potentially that does open a bit of a right flank against the Reform leadership, because you have other figures such as Ben Habib and others who have already come out and said that they feel as though Nigel Farage is potentially selling out a bit to get to a certain point. So I think it could be an annoyance. I don't think this is going to be what decides Nigel Farage's leadership, not least because for all the talk of how, the party is democratising, it's still pretty impossible when you look at the actual rules to get rid of Nigel Farage. The party is still very loyal to him. Most think Nigel Farage is probably the best thing in terms of how Reform would get to the point of power or power sharing at the next election. But it is still probably one of Kemi Badenoch's best weeks since
she hasn't said a
became
single word or done a
leader.
single thing. Yes,
exactly. She's just sat there, and that's probably very well advised.
Mm-hmm.
And again, perhaps it's not a particularly high bar, but of course, if it does start to look as though, this is a party that can't really function, and some of the previous criticisms of Farage outfits come back, that is probably better than anything Kemi Badenoch has managed to achieve on her own terms so far.
I mean, critics will just say that it shows that, for all the talk about Nigel Farage and the new party changing, etc., doesn't it show that they can't even have more than 5 MPs without falling out?
I think one of the, and this is something that I've been pondering over the last few months actually, is the sort of people who will stand for reform are very able, they're very diverse in background, very diverse in experience and knowledge. They will generally be very successful in what they do in a whole range of things. This is going to be brilliant if we do get to power share or into government for the governance of this country. Their abilities in committee and drafting legislation and asking questions and all this is top drawer. It'll be the best retail offer of candidates this country has seen for well over 100 years. But whipping is going to be a nightmare because they are all driven. They know stuff. They're a bit like that picture. I'm a cat. I drink coffee, and I read and I drink coffee stuff. They are going to be good, and Rupert is one of these people. He's an example of that. And I think whilst the structures are getting so much better internally, the branches, the regional thing, the campaigning, the getting boots on the ground, knocking on doors. I mean, the amount of people, even despite this fuss on Friday, that were out this weekend all over the country campaigning was phenomenal. The next stage of that professionalisation may be working out how one deals with big characters, with good ideas, who will rub against each other sometimes. It's the nature of politics, and it's the nature of the beast.
And you do see that. I mean, every party has an issue managing its MPs. Of course, the Tories have a particular issue. Keir Starmer now has a bit of an issue. You look at the different caucuses being formed
the farmers,
every day.
the rural.
Quite.
Stop at IHT.
Exactly.
And the Tories, let's sack the boss. How many times have we heard that?
But
how long? Kerry, everybody's going to be writing letters to get rid of Kerry.
suppose-
This is the norm in politics, and to feel it isn't.
It just doesn't bode that well.
It's
when
not ideal.
You have the infighting when there's only 5 MPs. What would it look like if there were 80? But that said, I remember having a conversation with someone involved with the Reform Party a couple of months ago. And even then they were talking about some of the Rupert Lowe tensions and saying, well, we can't actually afford to get rid of him now. But once you actually have more MPs, more aligned, then you have more freedom there. So it can work both ways.
Basically, in a party, though it's big in the countryside, it's big in its membership, absolutely, but it's very small in Westminster. Obviously, the focus is much greater and the pressures are greater on a smaller number of people. You see these splits they're much more apparent than they are in a much larger party where you may have people in that mood, but there's X hundred, so it doesn't matter so much. But I don't think it's different. It's not unusual. These things happen. Worse things happen at sea. It doesn't seem to be, and I agree with Katy, it's certainly not fatal. And the other thing is, with Rupert's great online presence, I'm not saying that there aren't many people in his X 100,000 followers that are supporters of reform, but I think the loudest support base is reform adjacent rather than reform. I don't think one of the members had a number of people write to them, email them saying, I've resigned. And one of the staff checked, and none of them were actually members of the party. So a lot of this fuss is coming from people who want to shift reform from where it is onto a different territory. And I'm not 100% sure that they're all actually members of reform.
Well, we're lucky then, I suppose, for Reform's perspective, that they've got to keep all those big characters in order. They've got the Chief Whip, Lee Anderson, to sort that job out.
Indeed, another big character.
Thank you, Katy. Thank you, Gawain. And thank you for listening to Coffee House Shots.